I'm not a cop. I'm not a tough guy either. I'm a person who made a dumb choice because I wanted the quiet life I couldn't afford anywhere else. I moved to the edge of a small town that sits beside a stretch of state forest. The kind of place with one grocery store, a bar that doubles as a breakfast spot, and a handful of people who know everyone's last name. I rented a little house that used to belong to an old man who died a few winters back. The landlord called it solid and simple. It was both. It was also cheaper than anything I'd seen in years. The first week I spent most of my time unpacking and trying to ignore the way the place smelled like damp wood and old paint. It had a full basement with a low ceiling and exposed beams. There was a furnace, a water heater, and a row of shelves full of junk left behind. The stairs creaked in a way that made you want to go back up as soon as you went down. Nothing in the ad mentioned the basement flooding. I found that out the hard way after a day of heavy rain. I went down with a flashlight and stepped into a shallow puddle. The water was cold enough to hurt my toes through my shoes. It had pooled near the far wall, right under a small window that sat at ground level. The frame was warped and a little loose. I told the landlord. He shrugged over the phone and said it did that sometimes, but it drained out on its own. He suggested a dehumidifier if I didn't like the smell. That was the level of help I got, so I dealt with it. I bought a cheap pump, ran a hose out the window, and tried to keep the place from turning into a swamp. It became a routine. When rain came, I went down there and checked the water. The woods behind the house were close. The property line ended at a row of tall pines, and after that, it was public land. I liked that. I told myself it meant peace. No neighbors peering over a fence. No dogs barking at night. Just trees and the sound of wind. The second week, I started walking the trail that ran behind my place. It wasn't marked with signs, but you could tell people used it. The ground was packed down, and there were old boot prints pressed into the dirt. I'd walk after work, sometimes at dusk, sometimes earlier if I could get away. It felt good at first. I'd been stuck in apartments for years, listening to other people's lives through paper-thin walls. Out there, I could breathe. I noticed the smell before I saw anything. It wasn't like a dead mouse in a wall. It was heavier. It clung to the air. At first I thought it was a carcass left by a hunter, or a deer that got hit and dragged off. I'd smelled roadkill before. This was in the same family, but worse. I followed it without really thinking. That's the truth I hate the most. I didn't stop and turn around. I didn't go home and pretend I never noticed. I went toward it like an idiot. The smell led off the trail, through brush, into a dip where the trees grew close together. The light was thin there even in the middle of the day. I saw a patch of disturbed ground first, leaves scraped away, soil dark and damp. It looked like someone had dug and then tried to cover it up fast. My first thought was a buried dog. The town was rural enough that people dumped animals they didn't want. I've seen that before. Then I saw what was caught in the roots of a small sapling, a scrap of fabric, pale blue. It fluttered when the wind moved. I stepped closer, and my foot sank a little in the soft dirt. There was a shoe, a sneaker, half buried, the laces tied in a messy knot like someone was in a hurry. The shoe looked clean compared to the dirt around it, like it hadn't been there long. My stomach turned. I didn't touch it. I just stared like my brain was trying to decide if it was real. A person can tell themselves a lot of things when they don't want to accept what they're seeing. I told myself it was a prank. I told myself it was junk someone dumped. I told myself there was a normal explanation. Then I saw a hand. It wasn't connected to a body. I didn't study it. I saw enough to know what it was. Pale skin, dirt under the nails, fingers curled slightly as if it had stiffened that way. I backed up so fast I tripped. I caught myself on a tree and almost dropped my phone. I didn't call the police right away. I don't have an excuse for that. Fear makes you stupid. Fear makes you selfish. I wanted to get away. I wanted to be inside my house with the doors locked, where the world couldn't touch me. I walked fast back to the trail, then broke into a run. My lungs burned. My heart hammered. I kept glancing over my shoulder, even though nothing was behind me. When I got back to my yard, I stood there for a minute, staring at the trees like they could spit something out. Then I went inside, locked the door, and sat at my kitchen table with my phone in my hand. I must have stared at the screen for 10 minutes before I finally dialed. The dispatcher sounded bored until I told her what I'd found. Then her voice changed. She asked me to repeat myself. She asked where I was. She told me to stay on the line. Within 20 minutes, there were cars outside my house. Real police cars, not the rusty truck you sometimes see with a light bar. 2 deputies came in first. One was tall and thin with a jaw that looked like it had been carved out of stone. The other was shorter, older, with a tired face and a calm voice. They asked me to show them. I didn't want to. I did it anyway. We walked back along the trail. I kept feeling like I was being led into a trap. Every snap of a twig made me jump. When we reached the spot, the deputies stopped and looked. They didn't act shocked the way I expected. Their faces tightened. They exchanged a look that told me this wasn't new. The older deputy told me to step back and stay where he could see me. He called for more units. Soon there were more people than I'd ever seen in the woods. Deputies, a couple of state troopers, and later, people in plain clothes who moved with a different kind of focus. They put tape up around the area. They took photos. They talked quietly. I stood on the trail like a useless piece of furniture. At some point, someone asked for my name again. Another person took my statement. They asked me if I'd seen anyone in the woods, if I heard anything at night, if I'd noticed strange vehicles. I told them the truth. I'd been there 2 weeks. I hadn't seen anything except squirrels and hikers. When they were done, they walked me back to my yard like I was a suspect or a victim. Maybe both. The older deputy said, "Don't go back into the woods alone." I asked if it was safe. He didn't answer the question. He said they'd be in touch. After they left, I spent the rest of the day staring out my windows. The next morning, I drove into town and stopped at the diner. People looked at me like they knew something. Maybe they did. Small towns leak information like a cracked pipe. A woman behind the counter poured coffee and said, "You're the guy who found it, right?" I didn't answer right away. I didn't want it to be my identity. She nodded like my silence was enough. They've been finding things out there for years. What things? I asked. She leaned in a little, lowering her voice. People. Pieces of people. Mostly people who pass through. A hitchhiker. A drifter. Someone's cousin who came up for a weekend and never went home. Stuff like that. I felt my face go numb. Why isn't it all over the news? She gave a sad little smile. It was once. Then it wasn't. Folks get tired of being scared, I guess. And the sheriff likes to keep things quiet. Keeps tourists coming. Keeps property values from dropping. I didn't know what to say. She poured more coffee into my cup like it could fix it. I left without finishing my food. That night, I didn't sleep. Every creak of the house felt like someone walking. Every time the wind pushed against the siding, it sounded like fingers dragging. I told myself the killer was probably gone. I told myself the police would catch him. I told myself I'd just been unlucky enough to move here at the wrong time. Then I went into the basement to check the water after another rain. The basement light was a single bare bulb on a pull chain. It made hard shadows. I didn't like going down there even when I wasn't already terrified. The puddle had formed again, bigger than before. The water reached almost to the bottom step. I waded in and dragged the pump closer. It made a dull sucking sound as it started. As the water level dropped, something pale appeared near the far wall. At first I thought it was a piece of plastic. The basement had all kinds of junk. Then the water moved around it, and I saw the shape. It was a finger, just the end of it, like it had been cut cleanly. I stopped breathing. I stared at it until my eyes hurt. My brain refused to accept it. A finger in my basement didn't make sense. It couldn't be real. It couldn't be here. But it was. I stepped back, nearly slipping. The pump kept working, the sound suddenly too loud. I climbed the stairs so fast I nearly hit my head on the low beam at the top. I locked the basement door, even though it was just a thin piece of wood. I stood there shaking like a child. Then I called the police again. This time they came quicker. The older deputy returned with 2 others. They took my keys and went down without me. I listened from the kitchen. The basement door closed, their voices muffled. After a while, the older deputy came back up. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in a single hour. He said, "We need to take a look around your property." I said, "How did that get in my basement?" He didn't answer. He said, "Has anyone been in your house besides you?" No. He studied my face like he was trying to decide if I was lying. Then he said, "We found more than a finger." The words hit me like a shove. "Where?" I asked. He hesitated. "Behind the shelves. There's a loose section of wall. Someone's used that space before." My mouth went dry. Used it for what? He didn't say the word. He didn't have to. They taped off my basement. They called in more people. They asked me to wait outside. Neighbors gathered at the edge of my yard. They stood in small clusters whispering. A few stared at me like I was the problem. I wanted to yell at them that I hadn't done anything. I wanted to grab my stuff and leave. But I couldn't move. I just stood there while my house filled with strangers. An hour later, a man in a plain jacket walked up. He introduced himself as a state investigator. He had a clipboard and the kind of polite tone that felt rehearsed. He said, "We're going to need you to answer some questions at the station." I asked if I was under arrest. He said, "Not right now. Not right now." That phrase stuck with me. At the station, they put me in a small room with a table bolted to the floor. They gave me water I didn't drink. They asked me about my job, my past addresses, my family. Then they asked about the basement. I told them again I'd just moved in. I told them the landlord had said the old owner died. I told them I didn't know anything about hidden spaces behind walls. They watched my hands when I spoke. They watched my eyes. They tried to catch me in a contradiction. After a while, one of them slid a photo across the table. I didn't want to look at it. I did anyway. It showed a pile of things on a tarp. Pieces of clothing, shoes, and small personal items. A necklace, a ring, a phone case. The investigator said, "These were behind the wall in your basement." My throat tightened. "How long have they been there?" He said, "Some of them have been there a long time." "Are there bodies?" I asked. He paused. "There are remains." The way he said it made my skin crawl. They let me leave hours later. They kept my house sealed. They told me I could stay in a motel in town, and the state would reimburse me later. Later felt like a joke. I sat in a motel room that smelled like bleach and old smoke, staring at the wall. I told myself the old owner had done it. That was the easiest explanation. A dead man can't deny it. But something about it didn't sit right. If the old owner had done it, why was there a fresh finger in the water? And if it wasn't fresh, how did it end up where it did? The next day, I went to the landlord's office. He was a big man with thinning hair and a loud laugh that didn't match his eyes. When he saw me, his smile stiffened. I said, "What the hell did you rent me?" He raised his hands like he didn't want trouble. I didn't know. "You had to know something," I said. "They found a hidden space with things." He shook his head, but he couldn't keep his gaze steady. It was just an old house. The guy who lived there was quiet, kept to himself. "Name," I said. He gave it. The name meant nothing to me, but the way he said it made my stomach twist. Like the town already knew it. I left without saying goodbye. I drove around the edge of town, trying to burn the nervous energy out of my body. I passed the forest again and again, like my eyes kept getting pulled back to it. By late afternoon, I was back at the motel. I tried to watch TV. I tried to eat. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. That evening, the older deputy came to my door. He looked tired. His uniform was wrinkled. He leaned against the door frame like he needed it to stay upright. He said, "We're still processing your basement." I said, "Are you going to tell me what you found?" He sighed. "Not yet." "What about the woods?" He looked down the hallway and then back at me. "The site you found connects to other sites. We're searching. That's all I can say." "Do you think the killer is still out there?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, I think someone used that basement for a reason. My skin went cold. Used it recently? I asked. He didn't answer that either. He said, I told you not to go into the woods alone. I'm telling you again. After he left, I sat on the bed and stared at my shoes. I didn't want to think. I didn't want to remember the hand in the dirt. But my mind kept replaying it. That night I heard something outside the motel. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a scream. It was the sound of footsteps on gravel, slow and steady, like someone walking past the window. I froze. The motel was on the edge of town, near the road. People walked around sometimes. It could have been anyone. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I held my breath. There was a pause, long enough for my heart to start pounding in my ears. Then the footsteps continued down the walkway. I didn't move until I heard a car door slam somewhere in the lot. I told myself it was nothing. In the morning, I found a pine needle on the mat outside my door. Just one. That shouldn't have meant anything. Pine needles get everywhere. But I hadn't been near the woods. I stared at it like it was a message. I went to the station. I asked to speak with the older deputy. They made me wait. When he finally came out, he looked annoyed, like he was dealing with a child. I told him about the footsteps. I told him about the needle. He said, "You're scared. I get it." "I'm not imagining this," I said. He held my gaze. "I'm not saying you are, but I can't put a guard outside your motel room because you found a pine needle." "What am I supposed to do?" I asked. He said, "Stay in town. Don't go back to that house. Don't go back into the woods." I wanted to ask if they had suspects. I wanted to ask if anyone had been arrested. His face told me the answer. I went back to the motel and tried to follow his advice. It didn't last. Because the thing about fear is it changes shape. At first it makes you run. Then it makes you want to know. I started thinking about the basement wall, the hidden space, the fact that someone had put those items there. Someone had been in my house long before I moved in. Maybe the old owner did it. Maybe someone else did and used his house. Either way, that basement was part of it. And I couldn't let it sit in my head without answers. On the third day, I drove back to the house. The tape was gone. The police cars were gone. It looked normal, like nothing had happened. The yard was still. The woods stood there quietly, pretending they didn't contain anything. I parked in the driveway and sat in my car for a long time. Then I got out. Inside, the house smelled different, cleaner, like someone had used harsh chemicals. The basement door had a new padlock on it. I stood there and stared at the lock. I didn't have the key. I went to the landlord's office again. He acted surprised to see me. I said, "Who put the lock on my basement?" He shifted his weight. "Cops, I guess." "Give me the key," I said. He frowned. "They told me not to." "It's my house right now," I said. "I'm paying rent." He looked at me like he wanted me gone. "Listen, maybe you should just break the lease. I'll give you your deposit back. We can forget the whole thing." "Forget it." like it was a bad repair job. I stared at him. You want me to forget that people were hidden in my basement? He swallowed. I want this town to stay calm. That was the closest to honesty I'd heard. I left his office without the key. I drove to a hardware store and bought bolt cutters. I told myself it was my right. I told myself I needed to see what they found. The truth is, I was past thinking straight. Back at the house, I cut the lock. The metal snapped with a sharp crack that echoed through the hallway. For a second, I just stood there waiting for someone to yell at me. No one did. I opened the basement door. The smell hit me first. Not just dampness. Something sour. Trapped. I went down the stairs with my phone light on. The bulb still hung from the ceiling, but I didn't pull it. I didn't want to be fully in that space. The basement looked emptier. The shelves had been moved away from the far wall. The wall itself had a section cut open like someone had taken a giant bite out of it. Plastic sheeting lay on the floor. A few pieces of tape still clung to the concrete. They'd been here. They'd worked here. I stepped closer to the opening. The space behind the wall was small, just enough for someone to crawl into. The dirt floor behind it was packed down. The air that drifted out was stale. I pointed my light inside. I saw scratches on the wood, deep grooves like something had been dragged. I saw a dark stain on the dirt that didn't look like water. I backed away. My chest tightened, and I couldn't get a full breath. Then I heard something from outside, a sound like a footstep on leaves. I froze. The basement window was small and cloudy, but I could see a shadow pass across it. Someone was in my yard. I turned off my phone light. I didn't know why. Instinct. I stood still, listening. The house was silent except for the distant hum of the furnace. I heard another sound above me, a soft thump, like a shoe on wood. My throat closed. Someone was inside. I moved backward, staying in the shadow at the bottom of the stairs. The basement was dark enough that I could barely see my hands. I listened again. Another step. Slow. Careful. Not a person stumbling. Not a kid running. Someone who knew where they were going. I could have shouted. I could have run up the stairs and out the door. I didn't. I stayed in the basement because my body locked up. Then the basement door creaked. A shape blocked the faint light from the hallway. A person stood at the top of the stairs. I couldn't see his face. The light behind him made him a dark outline, but I could see the way he stood. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't frantic. He looked like he'd been expecting to find someone. He started down the steps, one slow step at a time. My mind screamed at me to move. I finally did. I stumbled sideways toward the back of the basement, toward the cut-open wall. There was nowhere else. My foot hit something on the floor, a loose board. It shifted under my weight and made a loud clack against the concrete. The figure stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any noise. Then he continued. I pulled my phone up again, not to use it as a light, but to call. No signal. Of course. The basement was a dead spot. I backed up until my shoulder hit the concrete wall. The figure was halfway down the stairs now. I could make out details. A jacket, work boots, gloves. He wasn't carrying a gun. That didn't help. He stopped at the bottom step. He tilted his head slightly, like he was listening for my breathing. I held my breath. It didn't matter. He already knew. He took a step onto the basement floor. I raised my phone like it could protect me. He spoke. His voice was plain. Not a movie villain. Just a man. You're not supposed to be down here. My mouth wouldn't work at first. Then I managed. Who are you? He didn't answer. He took another step. I said, I called the police. They were here. They know about this. He paused. In that pause, I realized something that made my blood go cold. He didn't look worried. He looked annoyed, like I'd made extra work for him. He said, You don't listen. I tried to keep my voice steady. Get out of my house. He let out a short breath that might have been a laugh if there was any humor in it. Then he moved. Fast. He crossed the distance between us in a few steps. I tried to run past him toward the stairs, but he caught my arm. His grip was strong enough to hurt through my sleeve. I twisted and swung my phone at his head. It hit his shoulder instead. He didn't flinch. He shoved me hard. I stumbled and fell onto the concrete. The impact knocked the air out of me. He stood over me, breathing steady. I scrambled backward, my hands sliding on the damp floor. My phone skittered away into the darkness. I looked for something, anything to grab. A tool, a pipe, a piece of wood. My fingers found a rusted metal bar near the furnace. I yanked it up. He moved again, quick and controlled. He kicked the bar out of my hand. It clanged across the floor. Then he grabbed me by the collar and hauled me up like I weighed nothing. I tried to hit him. My fists landed on his jacket. It felt like punching a wall. He slammed me against the concrete wall. Stars burst in my vision. He leaned in close enough that I could smell him, sweat and pine and something sharp like cleaning fluid. He said, You should have taken the money and left. My mouth tasted like copper. I whispered, You were at the motel. He didn't deny it. He tightened his grip. I couldn't breathe. My legs kicked uselessly. He wasn't angry. He wasn't excited. He was doing it like a job. And that was the most frightening thing about him. My hand flailed out and found the edge of the cut-open wall. I dug my fingers into it, trying to pull myself sideways. The wood splintered under my grip. He dragged me away from it. I couldn't fight him. The pressure in my head built until the world narrowed. Then, above us, there was a sound. A car door. Voices. The killer froze. His head turned slightly toward the stairs. My heart jumped in my throat. I didn't know who it was. A neighbor. A deputy. Someone passing by. But the killer reacted like he knew he had seconds. He let go of my throat and shoved me to the floor again. I coughed and gasped, sucking air like I'd been underwater. He moved back toward the stairs. I thought he was leaving. Instead, he reached up and grabbed the pull chain for the light. The bulb snapped on. The sudden brightness made my eyes sting. He looked at me one last time. Now I could see his face. He was older than I expected. Late 40s, maybe. Plain features. Short hair. A small scar on his chin. The kind of face you'd forget if you saw him in a grocery store. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like someone's coworker. He said, "Stay down." Then he went up the stairs. The basement door closed. I heard a lock click. He'd locked me in. I crawled toward the stairs, coughing, my hands shaking. I hit the door with my shoulder. It didn't budge. I pounded on it with my fists. I yelled until my voice cracked. Above, the voices moved away. A car started. Then the sound faded. I was alone, in the basement, with the smell, with the cut-open wall, with the knowledge that the man who belonged to these woods had just left and could come back whenever he wanted. I sat on the floor and tried to think. My phone was somewhere in the dark. I crawled and found it near the water heater. The screen was cracked, but it worked. Still no signal. I tried the basement window next. It was small, but it opened a little. The frame was loose, just like I'd noticed before. I shoved it harder. The wood groaned. The window popped open farther, letting in cold air and the smell of wet leaves. I could see the ground outside, the roots of the pine trees, the shadow of the house. I tried to push my head through. No chance. But I could fit an arm. I reached out, fingers scraping dirt. My hand closed on a rock. I pulled it back inside. Then I swung it at the window frame. The first hit did nothing. The second cracked the wood. I kept hitting, again and again, until my arm burned. The frame started to break apart. I didn't care about the damage. I cared about getting out. When the opening finally widened enough, I shoved my shoulders through. Splinters tore at my jacket. Dirt packed under my nails. I wriggled like an animal. My ribs scraped the edge. For a moment I got stuck. Panic hit me so hard I nearly blacked out. I forced myself to breathe. I turned slightly, pushed again. Then I slid out onto the wet ground. I lay there for a second, face pressed into leaves, sucking air. Then I got up and ran. I didn't grab anything. I didn't lock the door. I ran down the driveway and onto the road, barefoot because my shoes had come off in the struggle. I ran until my lungs felt like they were tearing. A truck passed and slowed. The driver yelled something I couldn't understand. I waved my arms like a maniac. He stopped. When I climbed into the passenger seat, he stared at me like I was dangerous. I said, "Call the police." He hesitated. I said, "Please." Something in my face must have convinced him. He picked up his phone. As he dialed, I looked back down the road. The trees stood still. The house sat there in the distance, quiet as ever. I expected to see the killer standing in the yard watching me go. I didn't. That didn't make me feel better. It made me feel worse. Because it meant he didn't need to watch. He already knew where I lived. He already knew where I would run. and he had a basement built for hiding things people weren't supposed to find. In the days that followed, the story spread. The police didn't share details, but people talked anyway. They always do. I stayed in town for a while under what they called protective measures, which mostly meant they told me to be careful and checked on me sometimes. They interviewed me again. They asked me to describe the man. They showed me photos. They asked if I recognized anyone. I didn't, but I knew his voice. I knew the smell of him. And I knew that the woods weren't just a place where bad things happened. They were a place someone used like a workshop. The worst part wasn't the fear of dying. It was the feeling of being handled. Like I was just another problem he could solve if he had enough time. I left that town as soon as I could. I broke the lease. I didn't argue about money. I didn't care. When I packed what little I had left, I did it in daylight with 2 friends standing in the yard watching the tree line. Even then, I kept expecting to see a figure between the pines. I never did. Sometimes I wonder if he's still there. Sometimes I wonder if the town is still keeping quiet, still pouring coffee for strangers and telling them not to worry. I don't go back. I don't hike anymore. And when it rains hard at night, I still wake up with the smell of damp wood in my nose and the memory of a plain man stepping down a basement staircase like he owned the place. Because for a while he did. I thought leaving would be the end of it. It wasn't. At first it was small things. I'd be driving on the highway and see a truck with a ladder rack, the same kind of rack he'd had on his jacket's shoulders from leaning into me, and my hands would tighten on the wheel until my knuckles hurt. I'd hear boots on a sidewalk outside my apartment, and my body would react before my brain could catch up. I tried to make myself normal again. I got a place 2 hours away in a city where no one knows your name. I started a different job. I didn't tell people much about why I left my last one. But the town didn't let go of me. And I didn't let go of it. The state investigator called once, then again. Each time he said the same thing in a different way. They were still working on it. They couldn't share details. I should not contact anyone in town. And if I noticed anything strange, I should call. Strange. Like my definition of strange hadn't been rewritten. I asked him if they'd found the man. He said, "We're following leads." I asked if they'd found out who the victims were. He said, "Some, yes." I asked what that meant. He said, "It means it's worse than you think." Then he hung up. I told myself I should stop. Stop thinking. Stop digging. Stop letting that house sit inside my head like a splinter. Instead, I started searching online. I expected articles. I expected warnings. I expected something. There were a couple of old posts on a forum, a handful of news briefs from years back that used vague language, and one longer piece written by a local reporter who'd since left her job. It talked about missing persons around the forest. It talked about bodies found in scattered conditions. It mentioned a basement, but not my basement. Another one. The comments were worse than the article. People arguing. People saying it was a bear. People saying it was a drug thing. People saying it was all made up. Then someone wrote, "Everyone knows, and no one wants to say it out loud. That line stayed with me. A week after I moved, I got a padded envelope in the mail. No return address. My name written in block letters that looked careful, like someone had practiced. I stood in my kitchen and stared at it. My hands were damp. I didn't want to open it and I didn't want to throw it away. I finally tore it open with a butter knife. Inside was my old keychain, the one I'd dropped in the basement when he grabbed me. I remembered the moment it fell, the small jangle of metal, and then everything else got loud. My stomach rolled. There was also a note, a piece of plain paper, one sentence. You left something behind. No signature. No threat. That was the threat. I called the investigator. He told me to bring it in. At the station in my new city, a detective took it like it was evidence from a burglary. He asked if I had enemies. He asked if I'd told anyone about the case. He asked if I was sure it was the same keychain. I wanted to grab him by the collar and tell him to smell it, to feel what it meant. Instead, I said, it was in my house. It was in that basement. He had it. Now it's here. They promised to run prints, trace the paper, check the envelope. Nothing came back. Of course, nothing came back. That's how it worked. The real world doesn't hand you neat clues. A few days later, the older deputy called me directly. His voice sounded different, less tired, more alert. He said, "You got something in the mail." I didn't ask how he knew. I said, "Yeah." He said, "Listen to me. You need to stop poking at it." "I didn't send it to myself," I said. "I know," he said. "But you're part of it now. You were never supposed to be part of it." I sat down on the edge of my bed. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer right away. I could hear him breathing. He said, "There are people in town who think if we don't talk about something, it goes away. They've been doing that for years. It doesn't go away. It just gets quieter." "Do you know who he is?" I asked. He said, "I know who I think he is." My heart started thumping. He continued, "That doesn't mean I can prove it. And it doesn't mean I can protect you if you make yourself easy to find." I almost laughed at that. He already found me. "He wants you to feel that," the deputy said. I swallowed. How many people? There was a pause so long I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "More than we can count cleanly." My mouth went dry again. He said, "I'm calling you because you need to understand this isn't a ghost story. This is a man who plans. He's careful. He's patient. He has help sometimes, or at least he gets lucky because people look away." I asked, "Help from who?" The deputy exhaled. "From nobody you can point to. From a town that shrugs when something feels wrong. From a landlord who'd rather hand you money than a truth." I thought about the landlord's eyes. I said, "Why didn't you shut it down?" "We tried," he said. "We searched. We put pressure on people. We increased patrols. And then the budget got cut. And the sheriff got elected and told everyone it was under control. And the forest is big. You can search until you're tired and still miss what's under your boots." "Is he still using the basement?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. "Someone was in that house before you." Someone knew you were there. Someone knew when the police left. I felt sick. He said, "Do me a favor. Don't be brave. Don't be curious. Don't go back." After he hung up, I sat there and tried to listen to my own breathing. I told myself that was it. I would not go back. Then the investigator called again. He said they'd identified one of the items from the basement, a class ring. It belonged to a girl who went missing on a summer trip years ago. Her family had never stopped looking. He told me her name. I wrote it down. After the call, I looked her up. There were photos. Smiling. Normal. A kid who looked like she should be worried about finals and boyfriends, not ending up as an item on a tarp. I stared at her face until it blurred, and I realized something that made me ashamed. Until that moment, the bodies in my head were faceless. A general horror. A pile. A rumor. She made it real. I couldn't sit with that. So I went back. I told myself it was for her. For the others. It wasn't. It was because the fear had turned into a knot of rage, and I couldn't untie it from far away. I drove to the town on a Saturday morning. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I didn't tell the investigator. I didn't tell the deputy. The farther I got, the flatter the land became. The trees thickened. Gas stations became rare. My phone signal dropped in and out. When I saw the first sign for the forest, my stomach clenched. The town looked the same. The diner, the bar, the small main street with cracked sidewalks. Nothing about it said anything was wrong. That was part of what made me angry. I parked near the diner and went inside. The woman behind the counter recognized me. Her face tightened. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I'm eating," I said, like that was all it was. She poured coffee without asking. I looked around. A couple of old men at a corner booth. A woman with a toddler. A guy in a work jacket scrolling on his phone. Normal. I asked the woman behind the counter, "What do you know?" She didn't answer. I said, "Don't pretend you don't. You told me they'd been finding pieces for years." Her jaw worked. "You want me to say it out loud? You want me to put a name on it?" "Yes." She set the coffee pot down hard enough that a few drops splashed. She leaned in. "You're not from here. You don't understand the math people do. If you say a name and you're wrong, you ruin someone. If you say a name and you're right, you make yourself a target. People choose quiet." I stared at her. She softened a little. "I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to keep you breathing." "Does anyone ever talk to the families?" I asked. She shook her head. "The sheriff talks. The sheriff says a lot. The families want answers and they get sentences. They get pamphlets. They get prayers." I pushed the coffee away. I asked, "Who's the sheriff?" She told me. I went to the sheriff's office. It was a small building with a flag out front and a couple of cars parked beside it. Inside, it smelled like cheap air freshener and old paper. A deputy at the front desk asked what I needed. I said I wanted to speak to the sheriff. He asked my name. I told him. His expression changed. He disappeared into a back office and came back a minute later. He said, "He's busy." I said, "Tell him I'm the one who lived in that house. Tell him I got a package." The deputy's eyes flicked up. He went back again. This time he returned with a man in a uniform that fit too well. He had a smooth face and a friendly smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The sheriff." He held out a hand like we were meeting at a barbecue. I didn't take it. He lowered his hand and kept smiling. "What can I do for you?" "I want to know what's going on," I said. His smile stayed. "We're investigating a series of incidents." "Don't call it incidents," I said. His eyes hardened for a moment and then went soft again. "I understand you're upset." I felt my hands curl into fists. I said, "Someone sent me my keychain from that basement after I left town." He leaned back slightly, like he was weighing something. "And you brought it to your local police, correct?" "Yes." "Good," he said. "Then it's being handled." "It's not," I said. "No one has anything. No prints, no leads." The sheriff's tone stayed calm. "These things take time." I stared at him. "Do you want it to take time?" For a second, his expression shifted like a curtain moved. Then he said, "Watch your words." That was the first honest thing he'd said. I left. Outside, I sat in my car and tried to steady my breathing. I realized then that going back had been a mistake. Not because I'd learned nothing, because I'd learned too much. The sheriff didn't seem afraid. He didn't seem surprised. He seemed inconvenienced. I drove past my old house. I didn't stop. The place looked unchanged from the road. A quiet house at the edge of the trees. I kept driving and parked at a pull-off near the trail. The older deputy's voice played in my head. "Don't be curious." I got out anyway. The air smelled like pine and damp soil. Birds moved in the branches. Somewhere deeper in the forest, something knocked against something else. A hollow sound. I walked the trail with my hands in my pockets to keep from fidgeting. When I reached the spot where I'd first found the disturbed ground, it had been cleaned up. No tape, no signs. The leaves had been raked back into place. If you didn't know where to look, you'd walk right past. That alone felt wrong. I stepped off the trail and stood where I remembered the hand had been. The ground was firm now. I didn't dig. I didn't touch anything. I just stood and listened. At first, there was only the forest. Then, faintly, I heard a sound that didn't belong. A low mechanical hum. Not a chainsaw, not a truck. A steady, distant vibration. I followed it. It led downhill, through thicker brush, to a place where the pines grew so close together, the light turned gray. The hum got louder. My mouth went dry. I slowed and moved carefully, stepping over roots, pushing branches aside without snapping them. I reached the edge of a small clearing. In the center was a shed. It wasn't old. It wasn't collapsing. It looked like something you'd buy from a home improvement store and assemble on a weekend. There was a padlock on the door. A generator sat beside it, half hidden under a tarp, running. My heart started beating so hard it made my vision pulse. I didn't walk closer. I didn't touch the lock. I stood at the edge of the trees and stared. There were no footprints I could see, but the ground around the shed had been walked on. The grass was flattened in a path that led around back. I backed away the way I'd come. Then I stepped on a branch. The snap sounded like a gunshot in my ears. The hum from the generator didn't change, but a second later, the shed door moved. Not opening. Just a slight shift, like someone inside had touched it. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I ran until the trail appeared, and then I ran faster, lungs burning, legs shaking. When I reached my car, I fumbled the keys and dropped them. I swore, grabbed them again, and got inside. I locked the doors. My hands shook so badly I had trouble turning the key in the ignition. When the engine finally started, I backed out too fast, and the tires spun on the dirt. I drove into town and straight to the older deputy's office. He wasn't there. A different deputy asked what I wanted. I said, "I need to talk to him." The deputy asked why. I said, "Because I found something." He asked what? I hesitated. I didn't want to say it in that room. I said, "A place in the woods, a shed, a generator." The deputy's face changed. He said, "Sit down." I didn't. I said, "You need to go there now." He looked past me toward the hallway. Then he said, "How did you find it?" "I heard it," I said. "It's running." He told me to wait in a small room. I sat there with my knee bouncing like I couldn't control it. After a few minutes, the older deputy came in. When he saw me, his expression went tight. "I told you not to come back," he said. "I know," I said. "I found something." He stared at me, and I could see anger and worry fighting on his face. I told him about the shed. He didn't act shocked. He looked resigned. He said, "How far?" I described the path as best I could. He asked, "Did you touch anything?" "No." He held my gaze. "Did anyone see you?" "I don't think so," I said. He rubbed his face with one hand. "You need to leave town. Now." "What about the shed?" "We'll handle it," he said. "You need to go," he repeated. I stood up. "You're not going to arrest him." He flinched at that. "It's not that simple." "Why?" I asked. He didn't answer. I said, "Because he's protected? Because he's someone's friend? Because he's got a badge?" The deputy's eyes flashed. He said, "You're not wrong to think that, but you're wrong to say it in here." He opened the door. "Go." I walked out of the station feeling like the walls had tilted. I got in my car and drove. I kept checking my mirror. I kept expecting to see a truck behind me. Halfway out of town, I saw one. A dark pickup sitting at a stop sign, waiting. My throat tightened. It turned onto the road behind me. Maybe it was going the same direction. Maybe it wasn't. I sped up. The pickup sped up. I took a turn onto a side road. The pickup followed. My hands went slick on the wheel. I told myself not to panic. Don't drive like a fool. I drove past a cluster of houses and then onto a stretch where the road ran beside the edge of the forest. The pickup stayed behind me, not too close, not too far. That was worse than tailgating. It was controlled. I saw a turnoff up ahead, a gravel road that led toward a small campground. I took it. The pickup took it too. The trees closed in. My pulse hammered in my ears. I saw a set of bathrooms up ahead and a parking lot with a few cars. I pulled in hard and stopped near the building. Then I got out and ran toward the bathrooms like I was going to use them. I didn't. I ran around the building and crouched behind a dumpster, breathing through my mouth. I heard the pickup roll into the lot. It stopped. I could hear the engine idle. A door opened. Boots on gravel. Slow. Steady. I pressed myself against the cold metal of the dumpster. I held my breath. The boots stopped. I heard a rustle, like someone was looking around. Then close by a voice spoke. Plain. You keep doing this. It was him. My blood went cold. He didn't sound angry. He sounded tired, like I was making him walk out in the cold. The boots moved again. Closer. I squeezed my eyes shut. I pictured his gloves, his steady hands. I heard him stop right on the other side of the dumpster. He didn't touch it. He just stood. Then he said, "You saw something you weren't meant to see. That happens. People leave. That usually fixes it." My mouth was open, but no sound came out. He continued, "But you came back. That's different." I felt like I was going to vomit. He said, "I'm giving you a chance. You don't get many chances." I heard him shift his weight. I could picture him standing there, head slightly tilted. He said, "You're going to drive away. You're going to stop trying to be useful. You're going to let the town do what it does." I couldn't stop myself. I whispered, "People are dead." There was a pause. Then he said, "People die everywhere." The casual way he said it made my stomach twist. I heard him step back. He said, "If you don't go, you'll end up quiet too." Then he walked away, boots on gravel. A door shut. The engine revved slightly. The pickup rolled out of the lot. I stayed behind the dumpster long after it was gone. When I finally stood up, my legs shook. I stumbled to my car. I drove without stopping. I didn't go back to the town. I didn't go back to the station. I didn't go back to the motel. I drove until the road filled with more cars and the trees thinned. When I got home, I locked my door and sat on the floor with my back against it. I couldn't stop shaking. I called the investigator and left a message. I told him everything. The shed, the deputy's reaction, the truck, the campground. No one called me back that night. The next day, the older deputy called. His voice was low. He said, "They raided the shed." My heart jumped. "And?" he said. "It was empty." I felt my stomach drop. He continued, "They found signs, tools, cleaning supplies, power, a drain cut into the floor. Nothing that holds a person, nothing that holds a name. It's It's all just equipment. My hands went numb. I asked, "Is that enough?" He didn't answer. I asked, "Was he there?" He said, "No." "Did you find the generator?" "It was gone," he said. Of course it was. I sat there staring at my wall. The older deputy said, "Listen to me. You need to understand how this man thinks. He's not chasing you because you're special. He's chasing you because you're loud. You're a loose end." "I don't want to be loud," I said. "I know," he said. "But you already are." I swallowed. "What do I do?" He said, "You tell your story once, officially, and then you shut your mouth. You let the people with badges do their jobs." I almost laughed again. "Are they doing their jobs?" His voice tightened. "Some of us are. Some of us can't. Some of us are tired of trying to do it alone." I heard something in his voice then. Not just fear, anger. He said, "I'm going to say one more thing and then I'm going to pretend I didn't." I held my breath. He said, "If you ever feel like you're being watched, don't go home. Don't go to a motel. Go somewhere loud, somewhere bright, somewhere there are cameras, and don't assume that calling us means help arrives before he does." That sentence landed like a weight. He hung up. After that, I tried to disappear. I changed my routine. I took different routes to work. I stayed in crowded places when I could. I kept my curtains closed. It didn't make me feel safer. It made me feel like a person running from weather. The package wasn't the last thing. A month later, I found a pine needle on my car's windshield. It was tucked under the wiper like someone had placed it there carefully. I wasn't anywhere near pine trees. I stood in the parking lot staring at that needle while people walked past me with groceries. No one looked twice. I drove to a police station again. I showed them. They took a photo. They shrugged. I drove home and threw the needle in the trash. That night I dreamed about the basement. In the dream, the stairs were longer, the ceiling lower. The bulb flickered. I'd walk down and the smell would hit, and I'd know something was behind the wall, waiting. I'd wake up sweating. I started leaving lights on. I started sleeping with my phone in my hand. I started imagining his boots on the hallway floor. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. I did. The voice on the other end was the plain one. He said, "You're still talking." My throat closed. I couldn't speak. He continued, "I told you to be quiet." My hands shook so badly I had to hold the phone with both of them. I forced words out. "Why are you calling me?" He said, "Because you keep turning your head. You keep trying to look." I tried to steady my breathing. "You sent me my keychain." He said, "You don't own anything that came out of that basement." The way he said basement made my skin crawl. I said, "What do you want?" He said, "I want you to forget you ever went down those stairs." I swallowed hard. I can't. He sighed like I was stubborn in an ordinary way. "You can. You just won't." "People have names," I said. You took them. There was a pause. Then he said, You're trying to make me feel something. He sounded almost amused. He said, That's not going to work. I felt tears press behind my eyes, not from sadness, from helpless fury. I said, They're coming for you. He said, They've been coming for years. That line matched the diner. He continued, You're not the first person to get loud. You might be the first one who got out. That doesn't mean you stay out. Then he hung up. I stood in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to silence. I called the investigator and left another message. This time he called back. He asked what the man said. I told him. There was a long pause. Then the investigator said, We can't trace it. It's a burner. It's likely not even in the same state. I said, So what now? He said, Now you do exactly what the deputy told you. You stop making yourself visible. I almost laughed again. The same helpless reaction. I said, He already sees me. The investigator's voice went hard. Then you make it hard for him to touch you. That night, I moved furniture against my door like that would matter. I checked my windows. I checked my closet. I checked under my bed. I hated myself for it, and I did it anyway. Weeks passed. Nothing happened. The quiet was its own kind of torture. I started to wonder if he'd moved on. I started to wonder if the shed was a decoy. I started to wonder if the sheriff was part of it, or just a coward. Then winter came. Snow fell in my city, turning everything bright and clean. For a few days I felt almost normal. Then I got another envelope. No return address. Block letters. This time it was heavier. I took it straight to the station without opening it. They opened it in front of me. Inside was a small object wrapped in paper. The detective unwrapped it carefully. It was a ring. Not fancy. Plain metal. Worn. On the inside of the band were initials. The detective looked at me. Is this yours? I shook my head. My stomach turned. I said, It's from the basement. The detective stared at the initials. Do you know who it belonged to? I didn't. But I knew what it meant. It meant he could reach out of that forest and put something in my hands. It meant he wanted me to carry it. I left the station and walked through the snow, feeling like my body was hollow. I didn't know what else to do, so I did the only thing that felt like action. I went public. Not with a dramatic interview, not with a press conference. I wrote it down. I wrote the story the way I could, without making it a performance. I sent it to the reporter who wrote the old article. I didn't even know if she still worked anywhere. 2 days later, she emailed me back. She said she remembered the town. She said she'd been warned off the story years ago. She said she'd talk. We met in a coffee shop halfway between her city and mine. She was younger than I expected, with tired eyes and a careful way of listening. I told her everything. The hand, the finger, the hidden wall, the plain man, the package, the shed, the phone call. She didn't interrupt. She took notes. When I finished, she sat back and looked at me. She said, "Do you know what you're doing?" I said, "I'm trying not to die." She nodded slowly. "And you might be making it worse." I stared at her. She continued, "I'm not saying don't tell the truth. I'm saying he's going to read this. He's going to see his work described. And men like that don't like being described." I felt cold all over. I said, "Then what's the point?" She said, "The point is pressure. The point is light. Small towns survive on shadows. If you make enough noise, someone above them has to listen." I looked down at my hands. She added, "But you need to understand. You're asking people to be brave when you already know what happens to brave people." I didn't have an answer. She published the story a few weeks later. It didn't go viral. It didn't become a national obsession. It did enough. More reporters called. A state senator made a statement. The sheriff in that town held a press briefing and acted like he was outraged and committed. The older deputy got transferred. That last part hit me the hardest. I found out through the reporter. He was moved to a different county. A promotion on paper. A way to move him away in reality. I called him. He didn't answer. A week later, he called me back. His voice sounded different again. Flat. He said, "You should stop." I said, "They moved you." He didn't deny it. I said, "Are you safe?" He laughed once without humor. "I'm a deputy. I'm safe on paper." I swallowed. Did it help? He was quiet. Then he said, "I don't know." I said, "Do you know who he is?" He hesitated. He said, "I know the shape of him." "What does that mean?" "It means he's not one person in one place," the deputy said. "He's a system. He's someone who knows where the holes are. He's someone who learned that if you act normal enough, people hand you space." I closed my eyes. The deputy continued, "You came into town like a stone in a pond. You made ripples. That's good. But ripples fade if there's nothing to keep them going." I asked, "Are you telling me to let it fade?" He didn't answer. He said, "I'm telling you I don't want to get a call that they found you somewhere off a highway." I couldn't speak. He said, "Promise me you'll stop going back." I said, "I'm not going back." He sighed. "Good." He hung up. A month passed. 2. The calls stopped. The envelopes stopped. The pine needles stopped. I started to breathe again. I started to believe cautiously that maybe he'd moved on. Then one evening I came home to find my apartment door slightly open. Just a crack. My stomach dropped. I stood in the hallway listening. No sound. I backed away and went straight to my neighbor's door. I knocked until she opened it, annoyed. I said, "Call the police." She stared at me. "What?" "Please," I said. "Someone's in my apartment." Her annoyance shifted to confusion, then to something like concern. She called. We waited in her doorway until 2 officers came. They went in first. I stood behind them, heart pounding. My apartment looked normal. Nothing overturned, nothing broken. The officers checked the rooms. They checked the closet. They checked the windows. No one. One officer asked if I'd locked the door. I said yes. He asked if I might have forgotten. I wanted to hit him. I said, I didn't forget. They wrote a report anyway. They told me to change my locks. After they left, I stood in my living room staring at the air, trying to see what had changed. Then I noticed it. On my kitchen table was a damp circle, like someone had set down a cold drink. I hadn't. I stepped closer. Beside the circle was a single pine needle, fresh, green. I didn't touch it. I sat down on the floor and pressed my forehead to my knees. He didn't have to hurt me to win. He just had to remind me that walls were suggestions. I moved again. I didn't tell anyone where. I paid cash for a short-term rental in a different city. I got rid of my old phone. I changed my number. I stopped talking to reporters. I stopped posting anything online. I tried to make myself small. It helped in a way. But small isn't safe. Small is just quiet. Sometimes late at night, I still picture that basement. The cut-open wall. The dirt beyond it packed down by knees and boots. I picture the shed in the clearing. I picture the sheriff's friendly smile. I picture the older deputy rubbing his face like he could scrub the truth off of it. And I picture the plain man, standing at the bottom of the stairs, telling me I wasn't supposed to be down there. He was right. I wasn't. But I was, and now I carry it. People ask why I don't go hiking anymore, why I hate the smell of pine, why I flinch when I hear boots on gravel. I tell them I had a bad experience once. That's the simplest truth I can offer, without handing the rest of it to someone who might read it and feel seen. Because I learned something in that basement. The worst monsters don't hide under the bed. They rent houses. They own land. They show up on time. They learn the habits of the people around them, and they use those habits like tools. And if you stumble into their work by accident, they don't roar or laugh. They talk to you like you're a problem, like you're something that can be handled. And that's what still keeps me awake. Not the image of what was buried, not the smell, not even the fear of pain. It's the memory of his voice. Plain, certain, like he'd been there a long time, like he planned to be there longer.